applied to God refers to completely sinless, completely pure, completely unblemished. But when it refers to us, it can't mean those things because we're not capable of those things. It's more about a calling. I've chosen to be set apart. I've chosen to let God use me. It's like being a tool in the carpenter's hand, and that's what I've asked God to do with me. And Peter, in this book, kind of challenges his people to pursue that kind of a life, to pursue a life of holiness. And again, it doesn't mean you're completely unblemished and flawless. It just means you make a decision to be dedicated to whatever it is that maybe he has in mind. And so this week, as I was getting ready for that, and with the sermon today, I found an animal that kind of is a great example of the attitude that I'm wanting us to have. And what that led me to was looking at different animals and actually what they're called. And I don't know if you ever do this or not, but one Wikipedia search leads you to 3 others. And I don't know if anybody ever does that or not, but it did to me. And so I was going to do a quiz with you just to see how smart as a congregation you are, and just toss out an answer when you know it. What is a group of these animals called? And I'll put a picture up, and when you see the animal, just toss out what you think a group of those would. And we'll start with something kind of easy. A wolf, what's a group of wolves? Pack, right? That's easy, right? A group of geese, flock sometimes, but more often a gaggle of geese. I don't know why. I don't know who decides these things, to be honest, but it's a gaggle of geese. A bunch of fish is a school. A bunch of lions, pride. See, it's easy. Lion King, right? A bunch of bees, swarm. A swarm. They live in a hive, but it's a swarm when they're all together like that. Now, I didn't know this one. I didn't know they went in groups. A group of cobras, if you ever were to encounter a group of cobras, is anybody know? A bad day. Also true, but not the answer we were looking for. A quiver of cobras. If you ever encounter a quiver of cobras, that's a bad day. An embarrassment of pandas, which I thought was cool. That's why I put it up there. An embarrassment. You have an embarrassment of pandas. I thought that was a neat. Again, I don't know who decides it, but I like that one. And then this one here. Does anybody know what a bunch of rhinoceri are called? A crash of rhinoceros, which is cool if you know about rhinoceros at all, and that's how I got into this thing, and that's where I'm going to stop. Rhinoceros, they don't see very well. Rhinos don't see very well. They only can see about 30 yards ahead. If you're motionless, if you were motionless by the exit sign in the back of the room, and a rhinoceros was here beside me, he couldn't see you. He wouldn't know you were there. They react more on what they can hear. Their hearing is really good. What they can smell, their smell is really good. And so if you have a distinctive odor, he can find you. Or if he knows, if he can hear you, he can find you. And rhinos are called a crash of rhinos because they're heavy. They weigh between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds, and they can go between 30 and 40 miles an hour, and they lead with their head. How many of you were taught in high school to lead with your head? There's one or two of you, I'm sure, were taught that. And they lead with their head. And once they're going, they don't worry about what they can see anymore. They just take off. And I thought that was kind of an interesting picture for us. You know, 2 Corinthians says we live by faith and not by sight. And sometimes the things that we see don't take us 100% where we'd like us to go. And sometimes the things we see can be confusing and hard to interpret. So we rely on what we've heard. We rely on what God has already revealed to us, what God has already told to us, what God has already said, and we just go out boldly. We lead with some passion. I like that whole notion of it, and I think, the Bible says we can learn from the animals. In Proverbs, it tells you to look to the ant, and it mentions lions and horses and lizards even as different animals we can learn from. And I think that we can learn from rhinos. You just lead boldly. Once you know what to do, charge off as hard as you can. I also found out that there's some who argue this is a myth. Rhinos have a hard time going backwards. They can do it, but it's hard. They don't like going backwards. Rhinos are pretty much only a forward-moving animal. And again, I think that's a good example for us. We don't worry about what's behind. Rhinos don't have a rear-view mirror. They don't care what's behind. They just focus on what's ahead. And really, that's how we should be too. There's a reason why your rearview mirror is only 5% maybe of your whole windshield. It's because you're supposed to be mainly looking ahead. You don't look behind. You just focus on what you know and what God's already revealed to you. And that's going to, I'll come back to them in a later, but I think Peter would have that kind of advice for us in mind, and I want to come back to that in a little bit. 2020 has been a year of a lot of mixed messages for us. It's been a year of a lot of mixed messages for us as Christians. And not just as Christians, but just as Americans. You had the pandemic certainly over the top of everything, and that clouded so many of our decisions all year long. We had the election was just a miserable time. And I had a couple people unfriend me on social media, and I really don't post that much. I really don't. I don't know what I said. I don't know what I did wrong, but I did something wrong. And I read several people through the years say, if you believe this, whatever this is, we can't be friends anymore. And I thought we had left that behind in grade school, but apparently older adults can still fall victim to it. And it was a hard year. And what I noticed is a lot of Christians, because of the anger and the frustration and the isolation and everything else, a lot of Christians kind of took 2020 off. And I'm not really tossing stones at anybody here because I understand the temptation of it. And I was hit by it. There was a lot of times where you just didn't know for sure what to do next. It looked like everything that we had been doing, I want to get back to normal, but now normal is so far. I think this Sunday was our last Sunday a year ago. Oh, so we were off this Sunday. We didn't meet. This Sunday and next. So it's almost been a year since all this stuff has kind of went by the wayside. And I thought when we started it would be a short time, and then it just keeps getting longer and just keeps getting longer. And a lot of Christians have taken a lot of time off. It's not an uncommon thing over the last year for me to see somebody who would say this is their church, but I haven't seen them for months, right? And sometimes we might be in a crowded restaurant or a crowded gymnasium or a crowded store, and they'll say, we just don't feel safe going back to church, but we're in this crowded place, right? We're in this crowded building where there's all sorts of people bouncing off of us, and you feel safe to. Apparently, Walmart's the safest place in the world. I don't think anybody can get sick at Walmart because it's just crowded all the time. And so it's been a hard year, right? We can agree on that as Christians. It's been a hard year, and through this year, to me, the sad part is I think this was a season when the church needed to be very visible and very vocal. And very on fire, and yet a lot of my friends in ministry, people that I talk to occasionally, a lot of people discouraged, a lot of people depressed, and I've seen a lot of people drop out of ministry this year. It seems like in bigger numbers than before. A lot of people just kind of checked out of all of it, and I understand the temptation. I do. Mercy, it's been a tough year. But what I wanted to talk about today, since it's been a whole year, is kind of getting back in the game. And the rhinoceros, again, is going to be kind of our theme animal for this thing. In the same way that a rhino just goes forward. He focuses on what he knows and not on what he can see, leads powerfully, a crash. I want us to be a crash at Mount Pleasanters, if we can. I want us to kind of take that same sort of attitude. Hopefully, if I do my job right, we'll see how it goes. Out of this sermon, there will be some people inspired to do that. So what we've been doing is going through 1 Peter verse by verse, and this week we're in chapter 4. And so 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 1, Peter says, "Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves with the same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin." So Peter's talking to a church that's suffering, right? And the church that Peter was talking to, they were suffering because of state-sponsored persecution. That's not why we're suffering. No matter what you think of the mask mandate, it's not state-sponsored persecution. And really, to me, from my vantage point, the state for the most part leaves the church alone. There are some things the state does that makes it hard to be a Christian. for sure. And there's some things that the culture does that makes it hard to be a Christian, even more for sure. But we're not suffering in that same way. Our suffering seems to come more from all these other things I talked about: the rage and the anger and the division and certainly the pandemic hasn't helped, and it's just been a stressful time. It's just been a hard time. Well, Peter's advice is, since Christ suffered, you arm yourself with that same attitude. So think about what Jesus did. Jesus leaves the comfort of heaven to come to earth. Jesus leaves the comfort of being with God to come here and be with us. And he does it because he loves us. Whatever else you might think about Jesus, it seems pretty obvious from the gospel accounts that he was smart. He could have done anything. It seems like from the gospel accounts that Jesus was able to make friends very easily. He was socially very intelligent. He could have done anything. And yet chose to be this poor teacher who eventually lays his whole life down, he says, for the world. Lays his own life down so that others can have life. Pays the price on the cross that we cannot pay to appease us before God so that we can go to heaven one day. Jesus, who could have done anything, armed himself with the attitude that if I have to suffer, I have to suffer, but I'm going to take care of people in this. His focus was not on himself, but on others. And so when we suffer, Peter says, you need to arm yourself with that same attitude. Realize that this life story is not primarily about you. It's about everybody. And so you live your life with the same attitude Christ had, and you focus on what God might have in mind. And his second verse goes to that. It kind of reaffirms that same idea. As a result, we don't live the rest of our earthly lives for evil human desires, but we live it for God's will. And again, the rhino kind of is our deal. We won't always see how the suffering is going to work out. If anybody's in the middle of suffering, whatever the suffering is, it's hard to predict how this will turn out. Whether the suffering is a relational breakdown, or whether the suffering is a health crisis, or whether the suffering is a financial problem, or whether the suffering is just your own depression and anxiety. Sometimes in the middle of that stuff, you can't see what the next thing is going to be. You're kind of blind to very far in the future. But we can still focus on God's will. God has always been faithful. God loves you. Danielle and the band sang that really pretty earlier today. God loves you. And because God loves you and because God's for you, we can charge out in his will. Peter goes on. He says, for you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do. And that's true for all of us, right? I mean, maybe it varies what you may have jumped into, but a lot of us can look back at our previous life before Jesus and say, well, I've spent enough time doing that. I have a friend that I meet with occasionally, and he's very passionate about Jesus and the cross and all that stuff. And he's told me a couple different times he's only been drunk once in his life, and it was for like 30 years. He got drunk when he was 14 or 15, and it lasted till he was 40, 45 years old. But now you talk to him about that, about his previous life, and it's not so much regret, though I think regret's probably fair. He probably has regret, but it's like, I don't want to do that anymore. I know where that goes. I had a friend in Nashville. I'm sure I've mentioned this in a sermon sometime. I had a friend in Nashville who found out that his son was starting to smoke pot. They caught him. They had no idea that this was something he was dealing with. And so the dad talks to me, and what should I say? And well, tell him to stop. I mean, it wasn't hard. Well, I don't think I can, Dad said. I don't think I can say that. I don't think I can because I struggled with that stuff too when I was a kid. Well, man, that makes you the perfect person to say something. Because you know where that road goes. You spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do. You know where that leads. So tell them not to do what you did. Hopefully, we all want, don't we? If you're a parent at all, I want my kids to have a better life than I did. Well, it's not just financial that's about. It's not just financial. I want them to avoid the same sinkholes that I've jumped into. And you can help them there. Because we know what that's like. A few years ago, a friend of mine here in town, their kid made a series of bad decisions, but in the middle of the series of bad decisions, they had a wreck, and they were driving crazy fast on these country roads. And the parent said, "Can you believe a 16-year-old would think it's a good idea to drive 90 on a back road?" And it's like, yeah, I can imagine, because I was 16 once. You're bulletproof till you're 25, right? and you just don't think it's going to hurt you until about 25. You've done all that. Peter goes on, same slide. He says the people who are in the middle of that are surprised that you don't join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. The heaping abuse might be something as subtle as a college party where you're the only one who doesn't drink and they're all on you that you're stupid because you don't drink with the rest of them. It can be as subtle as that, or it can be something a little more serious. I mean, it can be where you're not part of the crowd, so you don't get the promotion. You're not part of the crowd, so you don't get the invite. You're not part of the crowd, so you don't get whatever it is. And they don't understand why you're not jumping into the same stuff they're jumping into. And the NIV calls it reckless and wild living. The King James, and a little more poetic, it says it's a flood of dissipation, or dissipation means scatteredness. It's a flood of scatteredness. That flood idea, the reckless, wild living, a flood, I think that's colorful, and I think that's interesting. I lived, as a kid, my mom and dad still live there, just above where Lost River goes across the road. We live back on the country road, and Lost River in Orange County, when it floods, we'll go over the road near our house. And when you're driving down that road, it's this long flat stretch, and then there's this dip where Lost River goes through. But if you're not familiar with that road, it looks like just this long road, and you don't realize there's this dip. You just see the water over everything. And so people will drive down it and they'll think, well, I can get through that. It's not that bad. Because when it first starts getting flooded, it's not that bad. But the dip's coming and they don't see it. And so they go out there and they get a little deeper and they get a little deeper. And sometimes the mud of the bottom of it, and it's faster than you think. It looks like just muddy water, but it's moving pretty quick underneath, and they'll start to slide. And of course, once you start to slide, you'll never get control of that thing again. You're going to be off into the deal. And my dad, as a farmer down there, we've pulled people out with tractors because they just get so deep into this thing. And there's signs up warning people, don't go down here, it's dangerous, but they think they can make it. And every time it floods, it seems like there's always one or two people that get in trouble down there. Or drive deep enough into it that it's obvious they can't get through this dip, and they have to back up through that muddy water and try to figure it out. And it's crazy because we know how deep it is. And it's crazy when we're sitting up there watching people. We can't believe they'd do it. Well, it's a flood, right? Reckless, wild living, it's a flood. And the people who are swimming in that muddy water, they don't know why you're not out there swimming with them. You can't imagine why not. Now, you see more clearly than they see about this thing, but they don't see it. And I think that idea of a flood, it's evocative to me. Because I think a lot of people are caught in a flood here currently. They don't know how they got caught up in it. They don't know what happened exactly to make it work out that way. They're just in a mess now. And rather than saying, maybe I need to change the course of my life, they just dig deeper. And again, it's like that 16-year-old driving fast conversation. Can you believe somebody would do that? Yeah, I can. I've done that too. Peter's advice here, though, he says, but those people are going to have to give an account to him who's ready to judge the living and the dead. The end is near. Now, Peter's argument here is important. So let's review Peter's argument. The first verse, first two slides I showed you, Peter's argument is life can be hard. We're all suffering. In the middle of suffering, we need to arm ourselves to think like Jesus because life can be hard. He says a lot of people cope with the hard life they are by jumping into what King James calls a flood of dissipation or reckless and wild living. To deal with hard life, they jump into this flood, and they don't know why you're not jumping into the flood. Right? Peter's argument, life is hard. Some people cope with hard by doing stupid things, but and all of us, Peter says, the ones in the flood and the ones outside are all going to have to one day stand up in front of God and give account of ourselves. Okay. Well, when I was thinking through this thing, I got to this verse here, actually these two verses, and it made me a little nervous about how to get into this thing, because I don't usually do a lot of preaching about the end, Judgment Day. I might mention it, but I don't go on and on and on about it, and there's a lot of reasons why I don't. One, I think there have been people who have taken advantage of Judgment Day and made outlandish predictions and prophecies that did not come true, and then when they did not come true, the whole church kind of looks stupid. Whether that was the intention or not, that happens. Every president of my lifetime, since I have been in ministry, somebody has asked me, do you think they could be the Antichrist? Not Biden so far. Biden's been pretty quiet. But except for Biden, everyone, Reagan, somebody asked me, you think Reagan could be the Antichrist? Because Ronald Wilson Reagan each has 6 letters in the name. Maybe it hits 666, maybe that's the one. Gorbachev, they thought might be because he had a mark on his head. And every president, somebody will come along and they're sure, And usually it's the opposite party. Most Democrats didn't think Obama was the Antichrist, and most Republicans didn't think it was Trump. But a lot of people in the other party wondered if maybe it was. If they were the Antichrist. And I don't think that, for whatever that's worth. I think all the people predicting it, a couple of years ago, a guy spent his life savings putting billboards up around the country saying the end was going to happen on a certain date, and then it doesn't, and it looks foolish, and he looks foolish. And even on this verse, I think Peter believed that Jesus was going to come back soon. That's why he says the last thing he says. It's going to happen. And the reason why Peter says what he says there is because Jesus tells us to always be ready because you don't know when I'm going to come back. But I think sometimes unbelievers look at that and they think it's foolish. You're always predicting it and then it doesn't come true. There's not just that, though. I like to, with my preaching, to focus as much as I can on, I believe that Jesus can help you today. And I don't want to focus on something way out in the future. I think today Jesus can help you. And a lot of my preaching, I try to focus that direction. I think that a lot of Americans, Christian and non-Christian, don't really think about this anymore, Judgment Day. It was not an uncommon thing when I first became a Christian to have some preacher, especially like at a revival or a longer meeting, to do more of a hellfire brimstone sermon. It doesn't happen as much anymore. It was a common thing then. It doesn't happen much anymore because I think a lot of Americans don't really think about that stuff. I think there's a lot of people who believe that eventually the science or the legislation will catch up and all of our problems will go away, that we'll just keep progressing and progressing and progressing until it all goes away. And I think that's foolish, but a lot of people believe it. When I first started preaching, I wrote all my sermons out by hand because typing took so long. Because when I would type it and make mistakes, which I made a lot of mistakes, you have to go back with whiteout. There's a whole generation of people that won't get to experience whiteout, and I feel bad for them, but I would have to go back with whiteout and make it look right. And so I never typed it. I just wrote it out all longhand. When I finally got a computer that I could just backspace and I could retype it and get it perfect before I printed it, that was such a gift, Now my computer will change my spelling for me without me asking it to, which has been even better. I can just start typing. I don't even have to look at the screen. And for the most part, it gets it right. In fact, if I wanted to do it, I could just tell my computer what I want it to type. And the voice recognition is close enough that it gets most of it right. I imagine before too long, I'll just be able to think of what I want to say, and it'll type it down. But I can't believe that my sermons are any better than they ever were. And I can't believe that people have improved all that much. For all the technology that makes it faster, we're pretty much the same people we always were. I don't think racism's any better than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The legislation has changed. I don't think poverty's gotten better. I think this myth that it'll all just one day be better. It will be better one day, but it's going to be when God finally says enough. It's going to be when God finally says enough. Jesus preached a lot about Judgment Day. He talked about it a ton, more really than any other teacher in the Bible. Jesus talked a lot about heaven and hell, and I think Jesus is a much better preacher than I'll ever be. And if he thought it was important to talk about, I think I need to make some mention of it. I know, and I guess a fearful thing for me as a preacher is I know that fear as a motive is kind of short-lived. If I only do it because I'm afraid, I won't do it very long. And so I hate for somebody to make a decision about Christ based solely on fear of Judgment Day, because if they make a decision based solely on fear, a lot of times those decisions don't last very long. But there have been times when fear kept me straight. Julia and I can be driving somewhere and we're arguing about how fast I'm going, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me how fast I'm going to go, and then I'll see a policeman to the side and I slow right down. I slow right down, just a glimpse at the policeman, and I'll slow right down, And that little bit of fear keeps me straight. I outweigh Julia by about 100 pounds, but she scares me to death sometimes. And I'll think about not wanting to disappoint her on something. I don't want to let her down on this. I know she'll be mad if I do this or that. And she's generally pretty gentle to me, but I can be nervous about it, and that little bit of fear keep me straight. And, having a little bit of fear, at least in the back of your mind, about this idea that one day you're going to die, and you're absolutely going to die. And one day, right after you die, you're going to stand before God. And you're going to have to give an account of yourself. And you're going to have to explain why you took time off when you did from what He wanted you to do. And I think He loves us, and I think Jesus is full of grace, but I think that's going to be painful for some people. And I think we just blow through it and don't think about it at all. And Peter says, you need to think about it. That's what this verse behind me is about. You need to think about this thing. Because one day you're going to give an account of yourself, and there's going to be real heaven and hell decisions that follow that. When I was, one of those hellfire brimstone sermons, when I was a kid, I remember a preacher telling a story about a doctor. And it was a town about like ours. And everybody knew who this doctor was. I mean, he was well known in the community. He had served on different little boards and councils and stuff, and everybody knew him. Well, one Sunday he comes to this church, and at the end of the service, he walks forward. He's the first guy to walk forward. I mean, the song has just started, and he walks forward, tells the preacher, I got to get my life right. And the preacher says, well, sure. I mean, yeah, let's pray and try to figure this out. And he says, and can I say something to the church? And yes, yeah, I mean, yeah, that'd be great. And at the end of it, this doctor, and again, everybody in town knows him, and he says, I got to tell you something. I work in the emergency room, and a couple of days ago, they brought this 20-year-old in. Well, the 20-year-old had worked, there was a military, again, it sounds like Bedford. It wasn't Crane, and it wasn't Bedford, but he worked at a military base in the same area, and there was a chemical that they could use to dry things up really fast. And they would toss this chemical on the water, and it would make a pop and a snap, and it would be gone. I mean, all the water would be like a puff of smoke, and it'd all be gone. And this 20-year-old, he had stolen a bunch of it from work because he was going to a party that night. He thought it'd be funny to play around with that while everybody was drinking. So they're all drinking, and they would toss this at water, and it would make this end pop, and everybody would think it was cool. And you could flick a little bit of it at somebody. And just the water on your skin, there was a pool and stuff, and it would pop, and, they would do that. Well, just they're drinking. And so it just kept getting a little more, and it kept getting a little more, and it kept getting a little more. And so finally one of them has this idea to fill up a bathtub with water, and we'll just, throw a bunch of it and see what happens. Yeah, that'd be a great idea. So they fill this bathtub up with water, and as the guy is getting ready to throw it in, he's been drinking, and he stumbles, and he kind of falls into the tub with all this stuff, and it just, it embeds in the skin of this man, and you're made of mostly water. And so they by the time the doctor sees this kid, I mean, he's boiling, and there's nothing in medical school to teach you what to do in something like this. I mean, it's not something you learn how to do, and we're going to have to peel this guy. I mean, we don't know how to fix him, and we're all talking to each other. We're not even sure what to do next, and they're trying to give him painkiller, but it's not enough to help him, and the doctors are talking to each other, and finally he grabs me. The guy on the gurney grabs me. You got to do something. I'm in hell. And we helped him as best we could. But he said, I've thought about that all week. I know I was a kid in church, and I know hell's going to be much worse than that. And I just got to get right with God. I'm trying to think what effect somebody saying all that would have on the church. I think that'd be pretty compelling. Yeah. Because I think hell will be worse than anything you can imagine here. And Jesus warns us about it. This is not where you want to end up. This is not where you want to go. Because whatever you think about the painfulness of it, and I know there's a wide range of thought there, God won't be there. And everything that makes this life worth living, the love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, all the qualities of God that make it interesting to bounce off of one another, that makes you want to be a better human being, that makes you, the hope that comes from knowing God, that's all gone. And it's all gone forever, and it won't ever change. And that ought to cloud your thinking. Even if you have been a Christian for a long time and are quite confident of where you stand with God, that ought to be something you ponder now and again. I'm going to have to stand in front of him and give an account of myself. And when I think about my last year and how I've checked out in some different areas in faith, man, and it's just a momentary thing. That's how fear works. I mean, it is. Life will distract me. We'll go to a restaurant or there'll be some movie on and I won't think about this anymore. But every so often, I need to center my mind again on this idea that this life, as permanent as it seems, is just temporary. And Peter says, because of that, you need to act different. Then he finishes up, and I'm going to finish up too with this. He says, therefore, because of all that, you be alert and sober so you can pray. Now again, think about the rhino again. You can't see that well, so you need to listen to God. You need to hear what God has to say. And the way to do that is to read your Bible and to pray. And that's it. And so you be alert, which means clear-minded, clear-headed. You try to eliminate all the distractions you can. Be sober, which can apply to drunkenness, but in this situation probably means more just a calm. Don't get all strung out about every conspiracy theory and every worry about what's going on. Don't worry too much about what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. You can't see that far ahead. You just want to listen to God today. You just want to hear what God has to say today. I'll confess to you that I don't think of myself as a champion prayer. I wish I was good at it, but it's always been kind of hard to get started. Now, I've never had a time in prayer where at the end of it I said, boy, I regret that. That was a waste. I remember having that. But there has been times frequently in prayer where as soon as I sit down to pray, I think of 30 other things I could be doing. Or when I pray really, really hard and it seems like I've been praying for a long time and only 2 minutes has went by, But I'm convinced that the only way I'm going to hear what God has for me is if I calm down and listen to him. And really, prayer sometimes is just being quiet before God. And ask God to move in me, to read his word, to ask God to sink that word deep into my heart. That's how I'm going to know he's there, and that's how I'm going to know what to do. And we live by faith and not by sight. Peter goes on. He says, above all, you love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Some people think that this verse, the last part, means when you love people a lot, they won't notice all the stuff you do. They won't notice all the wrong things. They won't notice your sin. When you love, they won't notice your sin. But I think it's probably more the opposite way. I think when you love like you should, you don't notice their sin. You don't see it like you would otherwise. There's a thing in Christian circles, sometimes we'll say we hate the sin, we love the sinner. But I think when you love people deeply, like Jesus did, you don't notice as much what they're doing wrong. You just notice them. And when you love like you should, it's easier not to get like a couple that is not loving each other anymore. They notice every stupid thing the other one does, right? But when you love deeply, you don't notice those things as much. You see it clearly with a parent. Everybody else can see that kid's a brat, but the parent can't see it because they just love them so much, right? They just love their kids so much they don't see what everybody else sees because they love them. And you can cultivate that. You can cultivate to where, when people talk about Christians, one of the accusations they make about us is that we're judgmental. But when you love each other deeply, like you should, you don't notice so much all the blemishes. You just notice them. Your heart goes out to them. You want the best for them. And we start to mimic Jesus in that regard because that's how Jesus focused. I don't think Jesus is all the time horrified by your sin. I think he loves you. And so you may think that you've blown it so many times he don't love you anymore, but I don't think he thinks that way. It says God is love, and I think when he looks at us, he just ate up with that. And now for us, Peter's going to finish one more verse. He talks about loving each other deeply. He gives you 2 hints on how to do that, and they're both in this verse. The first sentence is, offer hospitality without grumbling. As a memory thing, hospitality is when you make people feel at home when you wish they were at home. That's hospitality. And one way that we love each other deeply is we open up our lives to them. We open up our lives. We let people in. Even though a lot of us are wired in such a way that we don't like people to get in. We like to have privacy, right? We like to be protected. You offer hospitality, and you do it without grumbling. One of Mark's friends, my son Mark, when he was in high school, would just walk into your house. He lived pretty close here, and he would just walk into your house, and he wouldn't knock, and would like walk into your house and like head straight to the bathroom, or walk into your house and start making food out of the fridge. And we loved Mark. We didn't love his friend as much as we loved Mark. And so it wasn't like normally he would have the freedom to do, but he didn't think about it. He just assumed hospitality wherever he went. And I guess he mostly got away with it. I think when you're doing the first part of this verse the right way, people can come in. And they know they can come in. And then the second thing he says, and you serve. Use whatever gift you have to serve others. Use whatever gift God's given you to serve others. It may be that for some of you, you think that's a verse that doesn't apply to you, because in church, you can only serve if you can teach kids or sing on stage or clean, and you don't really like doing those things. But it's all spiritual. And whatever gift you've got, you can use it for God's glory. I know one person whose gift is numbers. They're really good at money. They know how to make money. They know how to spend money wisely. They know how to budget money. They're as smart about money as anybody that I know. But it's all spiritual. And so they've taken their gift and they've been helping at Becky's place. And they counsel the women who are there and help them to figure out how to turn their lives around. Because it's all spiritual. And whatever your talent is, whether your talent is numbers, or whether your talent is computers, or whether your talent is flowers of any sort, whether it's flowers that you plant in the ground or flowers that you bake with, whatever your talent is, God can use that, because it's all spiritual. It's all spiritual. It's all spiritual. And so one of the ways that we love each other deeply is when we use the things we're good at for other people. And we don't just take care of ourselves. Again, one of the secrets about understanding, and it's been Peter's point the whole way through this thing, one of the secrets about this life is that life is hard. You're going to suffer. And most people cope with the suffering by throwing themselves into reckless and wild living, whether that means just living for the weekend or drinking a lot of adult beverages every day or whatever it is. They find ways to cope with the stress of this life by throwing themselves into floods. But you know better. And you know that this life is just a brief glimpse of something bigger coming, and that we're going to stand before God one day. So we want to take the time we have here not to live for ourselves, but to listen to God and live for other people. Again, if I can remind you about these guys. Rhinos don't like to go backwards. They can. They just don't like to do it. They're mostly a forward-thinking animal. They don't see very well, so they rely on what they've heard, and they react that way, and they just crash forward. The world needs more Christians to crash forward. I really do think it's that more than any other thing that's going to change our community. It's that more than any other thing that's going to change our world. Have the band come back up. Dane Ortland has written a book that I'm reading called Gentle and Lowly, and I think it's a fantastic book, and I can't recommend it enough. It really is good. And Dane Ortland talks about Jesus as a doctor. Jesus calls himself a doctor in one verse. He says, a doctor comes for the sick, not the healthy, and I've come for sinners, and he compares himself to a doctor. And so Ortland takes that idea, and it says, imagine that a doctor in America had made a lot of money through his career. He was somebody who was top of his field and had just made a bunch of money. And when he got into his late 40s, early 50s, found that it wasn't satisfying. And so this doctor started studying up about some of the diseases that happen in the worst countries, the poorest countries in the world. And so he takes all of his knowledge and he finds out what disease that they're dealing with. And he figures out how to cure that, how to vaccinate for it, or how to prevent that disease, or how to heal that disease if you get it. And he spends all of his money on this medicine so that he doesn't raise money from churches. He's made all this money. He can do it on his own. And he leaves America, where he's made his fortune, and he goes to this poor country, and he wants to give the medicine out to anybody who's sick, because this country he goes to, they're devastated. Well, nobody wants the medicine. When he gets there, they all judge him because he's different. And who do you think you are coming here telling us what to do? And we've been fine for 1,000 years, and we don't need you to come in here and cure us or tell us what we have to do. And so nobody will take it. And people are dying. And he'll go to the funerals and he'll say, you know, it doesn't have to be this way. I've got the medicine right here, and I'll give it to you free. I mean, I'm paying for everything, and people don't want it. And one day, a young guy comes to him, just a kid, and says, my family would be mad if I took it, but I'm going to take your medicine. And I'm really embarrassed to have to come and beg you for it. How do you think the doctor responds in that situation? Do you think he says, well, you got a lot of nerve coming to me now? Do you think the doctor makes him jump through hoops? Okay, I'll give you the medicine, but you got to prove to me you really want it, or that you're really worthy of it. No, I mean, that's the whole reason I left America, to come here. I mean, no one else would come. The whole reason I even left was to come and give this medicine away. I mean, he's overjoyed to give the medicine away. And even if that guy goes out and hangs out with bad people again and gets infected again and comes back, I know I shouldn't have been there, but I was there. He's still not going to judge him. No, I mean, I got all this medicine. I just want the disease to go away. And so he gives it to him again. And again, every time the doctor sees anybody there, he's just overjoyed. That's how Jesus sees us when we come back to him. I mean, I think sometimes we assume that, well, God, I know I've asked you over and over again for help on this, and now I'm doing it again. But that's not how he thinks about this thing. I just don't want you to suffer. I mean, the only reason why I came from heaven to earth was to do this in the beginning. I want you to be better. I want you to be healthy. I want you to be right. And it's all free. And all you got to do is ask. I like that illustration. I like that way of thinking about Jesus. I think that's true. I think that's true. And when you come here to this place, in light of the fact that we're going to have to give an account of ourselves, because we're in a country that's in some pain, because we live in a time where there's suffering, because most people deal with the suffering by just not thinking, you can turn to Jesus. And he'll heal you. So if anybody needs today just to pray, we offer this time at the end of the service for that, where you can ask God, God, just move in me. And if you want to keep it quiet just to yourself, you don't have to tell us why we're praying. Just say, just pray for me, and I'll pray for you, or the Ryans will pray for you, and we'll lift you up. But if there's anything specific that you need, you can ask for that too, and we'll pray about that thing with you. And certainly, if the specific thing you need is, I need to get my heart right with God, because I know that one day I got to give an account of myself, and I'm not ready, then certainly you can do that today. And we'll pray for that too. Won't you stand up?